In this interview, I meet up with Robyn Robertson, who has 15 years experience in education, starting as an ESL teacher before joining a private school as an admission and outreach director. Robyn, her husband, and her two kids started their world schooling journey in 2012. Currently, she is an unschooling mom of two kids, podcast host, and school board trustee. Today, she advocates politically for home education and self-directed learning. Let's welcome Robyn. Thank you so much for coming in today, Robyn, and I'm excited to have you here.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. So I want to start off by asking you, what is the difference between unschooling and world schooling, which you have done both?
Yeah, I have, and I still try to do both. Well, I'll start with world schooling. World schooling is really learning and experiencing the world as you travel. And world schooling can look different where families can travel together and have a more structured form of learning where maybe they are taking or doing certain classes online while they travel, or maybe they are doing more of an unschooling free style of learning while they world school. But the biggest thing is really more or less having the world as your classroom and using that as your learning base, because through the experiences of travel and learning and meeting different people, there are so many things, so many points about it that when a child experiences and applies and learns and knows, that really sticks with you. So that's more world schooling. Unschooling you can do while you world school or not. Unschooling really is, actually it was a term coined by John Holt, who is no longer alive. He was an educator and teacher and education researcher. And unschooling, really, when he referred to it, it's more about learning and teaching in a style that does not look anything like conventional school. And so unschooling really now over the years has more become learning and education with really the child's interests in mind, following those interests and passions. And as opposed to being the parent, being an authoritarian top-down figure, you're more of a guide and a support, a mentor, a resource person to really help and guide and support learning and encourage learning. And unschooling really is the parent really unschools and learns along with their child. I think the biggest thing is, again, like world schooling, is experiencing learning through living life, and doesn't necessarily have to look like school. You can do school things like classes and have certain teachers, but really that's when the child is choosing and it fits with their curiosity and engagement in learning. So I think that's probably the two differences, but you can incorporate unschooling into world schooling.
You're doing unschooling for your kids, right?
Yes, that's right.
Always done it all the time, or do you guys switch back and forth between homeschooling or blended learning? Did you do any of that, or just unschooling from the
No,
get-go?
when we first started out, we did a more traditional style of homeschooling. So I started out with, I had our phonics books and reading and math and science, and I had divided into subjects. There was a certain time that we did that. I actually had my phone where I would do the alarm. The alarm would go off when math was done, and then we'd move into reading kind of thing or writing. So I started out more structured. But then we gradually moved into unschooling, and it wasn't something that I planned. It more or less happened, and I found ourselves in a situation where we looked less like the traditional classroom and farther away from that, more like an unschooler, even though at the time I didn't know it was unschooling. It was only after I realized, wow, this has changed. We don't look like we used to in our learning. It is a lot more open and free and on our own time. And it flowed a lot more than it did before. And when I looked into what other people were doing, or if I was way off the track, then I found out, okay, there's this thing called unschooling, and other families are doing it as well. We're not the only ones off the regular track here. And that's how we came into unschooling. To make it a long story short, but that's how we came to it.
Nice. So every parent kind of, when they start off more rigid, like they try to recreate school at home, right?
Yes.
That's kind of the starting point, because we're so worried, right?
Yes, that's exactly it. You nailed it. I think that's what we do. That's what we know, right? So that's what we repeat and try and do, is recreate school at home.
Yeah. So many parents now, right now, what's going on, right? They're worried about if they do take their kids out, they're gonna, the word they used in one of the posts is that I'm gonna ruin my child's future by taking them out of traditional school. So, what's your advice for parents who are feeling or thinking like that? Because that's,
Well, I think it's an interesting question because I think in some ways every parent has that feeling at some time or other, whether our child's going to school or not. Are we doing the right thing? Are we providing them with the right opportunity? Are the choices that we are making right now, will it potentially ruin our child? And I think that
Mhm.
falls into a regular parenting fear or concern, no matter what educational path we choose. But I do understand that if you're doing something like homeschooling or unschooling, it looks very different from what most people would be doing. It's a very different path. So the question is, will it lead to a successful future for my child when I'm not doing what seems to be the steps in order to get there? What we think are always the guaranteed path to success. There's a
Mhm.
few things. It's not always a guaranteed path to success, following certain steps in school and doing things that, some say that you should do. Not everybody lands exactly by doing a certain amount of homework every day, by following this, by not doing this, by going to this school, by not going to that school. Doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to end up where you think you are, where your parents thought you're going to.
Mhm.
I always ask, when you're thinking, if you're a parent and you're concerned about that, first think about and even write down or draw what a successful future looks like for your child. What does that look like? If you did not ruin your child's future, what would that look like? What's the best case scenario? Would they be in a certain job? Would they be making a certain amount of money? What would they be doing? Where would they be living? What would it look like? And then on the other side, what would it look like if you did ruin your child's future? Paint that out, write that out. And then after you've done that, compare, look at it, and really look at, especially the side where it's a successful side, does that fit your child? Or is that a little bit more of a reflection of your own personal fears? Maybe something you didn't do in life, maybe something you always wanted to do in life but never did. And therefore, you're putting that upon your children. You want your children to accomplish something. Maybe is it a reflection of how others will view you? And therefore, that's why it's so important to you. But possibly, maybe it is, it's something where if you talk to your child about it, would that reflect your child the best? Do you want your child, for example, to be, I had a friend who felt that their child should be really going to engineering because there was a lot of opportunity and they can get a good job. And, that's something that they felt they should do. Their child, they felt, could, figure things out like that. But really, their child was a dancer. Like everything this child did, they explained and expressed in movement. And it was so beautiful in a way that I'd never seen anyone else do. And putting them on a certain path to be an engineer, really when they looked at who their child really was and their strengths and their beauty and power, it was not on this path, on this certain path. And they really had to look at, they actually would be rooting their child's future if they put them on that other path towards engineering. They weren't necessarily supporting their child in the best way by pushing them into this other side. So I always ask, what is your real fear behind ruining your child's future? And working with your child and communicating with your child, that's the best way to get to it together. If they're part of the conversation, what does a successful future really look like? And then go from there. Because maybe unschooling or homeschooling is the best pathway. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's a different form of learning or education that you can tap into that will really
Mhm.
serve them better.
Yeah. And will this work is something that you're going to feel because you're not used to it, right? We're not used to it, that type of learning, right?
Yeah, exactly. You're going against the grain, right? It's,
Yes.
you're doing something that looks different and is very different. And you'll get questions because of that too. So even more so, it's a bit of like you're hitting up against something that really you might just have to push through after. But in the beginning, there's a little bit of resistance to it from our internal selves and sometimes from our environment. So that's exactly
Mhm.
it. Yeah.
Did people ask you what are you doing with your kids? Like, I mean, people sometimes judge you, right? Are
Yeah.
you really going to keep them home and teach them, right? What happened there? Like, how does that? work?
Yes, people absolutely like to share their opinions about education with me. I think that that happens. It's a topic that is a popular, like politics. People like to talk about education like that too.
Yeah.
Um, I think it depended on in the very beginning when we first started. I think I really, I was kind of getting my footing, and sometimes I wasn't even sure myself of how to answer. Really, the biggest thing in the beginning was that we're just taking it day by day, year by year. Right now, this is
Mhm.
working for my children, and if it comes to a point where it doesn't, and they need something else, then we adjust and change. But right now,
Mhm.
this is where we're at, and this is what fits them. But the
Perfect.
more that I learn as well, and see and understand my child, my individual children,
Mhm.
then I can explain things a little bit better because I have a better understanding of who my kids are and what's fitting them. But it's the same. We take it year by year, day by day, and we work with what supports them the best.
Yeah. And then they could see it too, right, along the way, how your children are turning out, because they're also worried, are you going to ruin your own kid, right? That's
Yeah,
why your neighbors or your family members think,
yeah,
what are you doing?
absolutely.
You're not putting them in school. There's something wrong, right? But it's
Yeah,
not. It's not. You're letting your child lead and
yeah,
understand the path better.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Um, I wanted to ask you about you've homeschooled your kids early on, right? When they were younger, like they were
Yes.
young when you guys started. What about for parents who have somebody in maybe entering high school or later in the year? It's a little harder, right? Because the child might have saying in it, right? So how do you can you give us some advice on how they can handle that,
Well,
parent?
I think really the most important thing is being engaged with your child and having a conversation with your child, making sure that you're both on board together and that your child understands that you're there to support them and help them. It's not something, sometimes there may be times where it's a parent's choice, but it's not necessarily something that the child is really ready to do just yet. And sometimes it takes half a year of conversation and finding out what's best before you make the choice. So, if you can, it's something that it's okay to go into slowly, even bit by bit, and try. Some parents I know do it part time. If you can do, some parents try the blended learning where their
Mm.
child goes to school for some classes and they're home for some classes. Some jump all the way in, but it's really getting to know your child and why, getting behind the why you want to do it. Why right now are you choosing to do this? Is it because is there bullying? Are they not being challenged and have a certain goal that they want to get to, and maybe you'll have the time and freedom to pursue that? Or what are the reasons? What's your why? And then it makes the how and what a lot easier. And so if you're looking at homeschooling or unschooling at a later age, being really clear from the beginning of the why, your values, your family values, your values on life and learning, and being a partner with your child in that. And then it helps the process to go a lot smoother. And also then you have an idea of where you're working towards. So okay, this is maybe, if your child, for example, wants to pursue a sport, maybe this will work because we can do this kind of training or travel at this time. It'll be a lot more flexible, and your child then can understand that. Or maybe they just need some more time. Maybe your child needs some time to really get to know themselves better. Maybe they need that space. Or maybe there's a relationship where you see that your relationship needs to be strengthened and a better foundation needs to be laid. So,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
it really get behind the purpose and why that you're
Why?
doing that, and then go from there.
Getting clarity. And when your kids go with other kids who are in traditional school, meet up with other kids, do they have any stigma against being homeschooled? Like, do they face anything? Do they question how come you're not in school? What are you doing at home, kind of thing? Or is
Other kids, sure, some kids probably do. Pretty well, I think that, mostly everyone that they encounter understands that we homeschool or unschool. But sure, there's questions for sure. And my kids are pretty, they just say, we homeschool. That's what we've done for a while. And
yeah.
they sometimes explain it, or maybe they don't need to explain it. But um, the ironic thing that I find usually happens when I listen in on these conversations, it's usually the other child starts saying, "Oh, yeah, I don't like school. I wish I could stay home." Or they start telling my kids all of the horrible experiences of school. or even their friends that go to school that they get together with will talk to them about the things that they hate about school, or they need to change about school, or they don't want anymore. And they tell it all to my kids. And, my kids kind of think like, yikes, that's something I don't want, which is the irony of it all in that way. But my kids end up being a sounding board from their friends of the things that they don't like about school.
Yeah, it's the other way around.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, why did you start unschooling versus homeschooling? I think you told us earlier that you kind of switched, right?
Yeah.
You kind of transitioned, correct?
Yeah. Really what happened was in the very beginning, the first year, we took my son out of school halfway through grade 1. And we actually were traveling, we were world schooling. And what happened was our teachers were actually really supportive. The school was fantastic, and they sent all of the work to finish for the school year with us. And what happened is, because you have that time and space, we finished the school year work very early. Everything that this class was going to be doing up until the end of the year, we had completed, within the first month or so. So then after it, it's kind of like, okay, so now I'm like, yeah, I'm done this math book. We're done all of this already. Now what kind of thing. And so I really gave the kids space to play and to experience things. We were in Jamaica first. So we really wanted to, travel, because I have family there. My dad is there, and we wanted to travel the island and see our family and spend time. And so that allowed us to do that. We spent a lot of time at the beach in the afternoons. And what happened was that I saw that my kids were, even more engaged in the learning process than they were if they had to sit down formally and do like a memorization or rote or something like that. And what they had learned, when they actually practically applied it or were engaged, it really seemed to stick with them. They would talk about it more. They would show me examples. And I really saw how that learning was sticking by them actually living it and experiencing it. So I wanted to do more of that. We did more play, we did more creation and things like that. And it really just, their learning was reflected in what they said, what they did, what they created on their own. So I went more into that unschooling approach as time went on. And I kind of just found myself there. I think formally there was a defining point though, because with unschooling, we don't use any curriculum. But the point when I decided not to follow our local or provincial curriculum anymore was my son there was a social studies unit where you have to study specific countries in this one grade. And the point is that your child is supposed to understand, the global world and the differences and the similarities between yourself and other places and people. And so therefore you learn this list of countries in the curriculum. And my son said, I don't want to learn those countries. I want to learn these countries instead, that he'd already been studying, because he was interested in the animals and the environment there. And and he asked me why he had to learn these specific countries that he didn't want to learn. And my only excuse is like, because they said you had to, because it's in the curriculum. It wasn't, and he kind of looked at me like, that's not a very good excuse. And I realized I couldn't really validate it or explain it very well, because it was just like, somebody said you had to learn these countries, and so therefore that's why you have to learn them. So when I talked to our teacher facilitator at the time and explained, that my son actually didn't want to learn these countries, he already had other countries picked out he'd already been learning and that he wanted to pursue, their comment was kind of like, well, just do them because it says you have to do them. Or, that was one facilitator. The other one had said, I understand, because the outcome to reach the goal, my child had already reached, because we just had the advantage of traveling and living in different places. So my kids had firsthand experience on those outcomes, that seeing different places and how they were similar and how they knew they lived it already. So those outcomes were already reached, but yet I couldn't check them off because they hadn't studied those 4 countries. So it just
handed in something, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that was a point where I thought, you know what, well, we're just going to go with, the kids are already guiding their learning very well. And it just wasn't working as much anymore. I wanted to go with their interests and their passions, because I saw that they were very engaged in learning a lot.
Perfect, right? And that's why we always wonder why students are not motivated or engaged, right?
Yes.
We lose them because of this reason.
Yes.
isn't it? We're
Yeah.
asking them to do things without knowing the why and the purpose.
That's
And we
exactly.
don't have a good explanation.
We don't sometimes know the why and the purpose. That's right.
Say we have to do it. It says in the curriculum, so it's hard for
Yeah.
kids to understand that, right? Yeah. So can you share with us what a typical day of unschooling looks like at your house for your kids? What do
Um,
you?
what do we do?
Yeah,
So
like how do you start your day? Like I know you said it's not traditional, right? Some parents, they don't really know what does it look like, right? Yeah, what does it look like?
it looks different. Sometimes some weeks look the same. Sometimes they look different. Really, I get up in the morning before my kids get up because I don't wake my kids up. They don't have to be up for a certain time. So I let them sleep when they, as they need. I get up and I usually take the time to do my work or any planning before they're awake. My daughter usually wakes up first. And for her and I, we've just created this routine on our own, or like a rhythm where we usually do something together first thing. So it's kind of like a good morning snuggle time. And then usually we read out loud together, or we do a game or puzzle or something like that together, something that she initiates. Sometimes it's a novel that we're reading together, maybe a shorter book. So we usually do that in the morning until my son wakes up. And then we have breakfast together. And I find usually what happens with breakfast is that a conversation usually begins that kind of sets our day. My son really is into music. Both of my kids are, but my son loves guitar. So usually he kind of begins playing, just sitting, like I always say, it's almost like his meditation. He sits and just plays the guitar.
Mm,
And then after breakfast, usually we carry on with something we've been talking about, whether we explore it more. I usually make sure I'm available for them and they know that if they
mm,
need something, I am present. I think that's a big
mm,
thing with unschooling as well, as some people think it means like completely laissez-faire, like you're hands off, you don't parent, you just, it's a free for all. Where actually I find unschooling parents are extremely engaged with their kids' learning. They actually have to be very present. So usually the day I let them know that I'm there, I'm present to help them with anything, and then we go from there. Sometimes my kids create something in the night before that they want to do the next day so that I have an
mm,
idea of how I can help them, or they just have plans for something like that. Now, because of COVID, the time is different. Usually my kids are pretty engaged in their community and activities and sports. So I
yes.
find our day is at home, and then the afternoons and evenings are filled with the other activities that they do around the community. So that's kind of a general idea of what our days look like.
That sounds very good. Coming together in the morning and meeting. Sounds like something that we would only do when it's a holiday.
Yeah,
Sometimes, most
yeah,
families. You guys do that every day. That's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah. That's yeah, yeah.
It's cool. So, so if is there like next thing the parents will be looking for is there a rule that you set guidelines when you're unschooling your kids? Like is like if they choose to sleep all day, I'm just asking as a one day they choose you will just let them, like is there rules and guidelines you have to go to this bedtime, wake up this time, or no? They just lead.
Yeah, we have rules. I think we have guidelines because I think every family has their guidelines.
Yeah.
Maybe our guidelines look different from another family. Um, so I think it depends on what it is. We do my kids. Sometimes depending on what they're doing. My son's a teenager; he's almost 14, so he definitely sleeps a lot longer.
Mm,
But yeah, usually he doesn't sleep past noon. Like I'll probably, if it's a certain later in the morning, I'll wake him up. If he's sleeping a little bit longer and there's things that he wants to do. But there's also things like our family values are that we are a family and everybody is an equal part of this family. So that also means there's things around our yard and life that our kids are part of and they help us with. So for example, my son is mowing the lawn right now. They have something every day. They take care of their animals. They have cats and dogs. We have chickens. There's things like that they also accomplish and do every day that is part of being part of this family that whether you want to say it's just a routine or guidelines that we have, yes, absolutely. But maybe we might have a little bit more of an open time to do them in, but we still, as part of the family, we hope that they they get done or completed every day or within the week or whatever is needed. So yeah,
Yeah,
we
that's
definitely have
awesome.
time
So
with it.
it's not like a schedule. Yeah, you need to do it here and there. They know that they have these activities they have to do and they'll just get it done. So it's more meaningful and more relaxed, not like do it now. What are you doing? Why aren't you doing? It's
Yeah,
not that type of parenting,
yeah,
right? It's
no,
easy,
yeah.
much more easier. Yeah.
Yeah. But you know, I'm still working on being a parent every day. So, you know, there's definitely times where we, you know, sometimes have disagreements, or, you know, there is a place we have to go to. So maybe something has to be done by a certain time. So it's a reminder, you know, okay, well, we have to leave by this time. So please make sure that this is completed by this time so that we can get ready, so that we have time to be early, so that we can, you know, look at that thing that you wanted to look at, so we have enough time to do that. So, you know, there's also days where maybe it's not working so well and we have to sacrifice something because we didn't complete, you know, something else. So
It's consequences, right?
yeah,
If there is something like that. And I think that's the cool part of, as I learn more and more about unschooling, is that you're respecting your child and you're giving them, you know, that space to self-direct them, and not only in learning, but in everything, in everyday stuff we do, right? Things we do. And that's just magical how they will regulate themselves very quickly, and then only there are some days, as you say, we all have our days, right? It's not
yeah,
always magical, but will fall out of our thing, but that's okay. That's part of learning as well. So it
yeah,
is, as I learn more and more through this even summit, I'm actually like looking at it like, wow, it's different.
yeah,
The space is different, right? The
yeah.
relationship is different with your kids. Yeah, for sure. So is there a lot of organization and planning you have to do to unschool your kids every, like for like on a weekly basis? Do you do a lot?
It depends. It's hard to quantify because I'm not sitting down with a school planner and saying that these lessons or things have to be done within a certain time. Where we live, every homeschooler or unschooler has to register with the education department, and they request a yearly home education plan. So there's 2 times a year my kids and I do sit down, and the beginning of the year and in the spring or end of year, where we, you know, where I ask them, you know, what have you, for next year, what do you want to learn? What have we done this past year that you want to repeat, that you feel was not good, that didn't work, that would you like to continue your interests? So, and then we plan their home education plan for the following year from that. And then we sit down again in the fall and review it going forward before we submit it. So that definitely takes some time and attention. And then it's also something that we can refer to through the year, even though it's a fluid document. And then unschoolers use a term you might hear called strewing. And it's when you hear an unschooler talk about strewing, or a parent talking about strewing, it's when you take resources, information, materials, objects, books, and you place them around the home. Or some have certain areas, some have like what they call a morning basket, or a table where they put those resources. And it's kind of like an enticement into learning. In early childhood, they call it an invitation to learning. And it's really an invitation. And so it's to spark an interest. Maybe it follows up on a question or a curiosity or something that you think maybe my child might be interested in. So I will leave this, you know, book or guide or something like that. They might pick it up, they might not. So there are times where, you know, I will take some time to find those extra resources and materials to strew and to leave out. Sometimes it's just a matter of having different books and finding certain pages and leaving them open for my kids to discover. Or sometimes it's other things that I know might get them even more engaged in something we've been talking about. So the time is hard to quantify, but I probably weekly take time, like on the weekend, and think about the week coming up and the conversations we had, and what will be a good support for them to help them in their learning.
Perfect. So for subjects more that are concrete, such as math or science, where how do you teach them to your kids? Like, how do you deliver that?
Well, math and science are really something that, especially myself, as I unschool more, I see how much of it's reflected in the natural world. Sometimes it's a lot of observation and being able to pick out where math and science really has a lot of practical application, and where maybe certain things like certain formulas or uses appear for us. And it's like, oh, this is, this is why the Pythagorean theorem theory is here, how we can use it, so there's a lot of that cooking. I think my kids seem to really understand fractions really well, and I really think it's because of all the cooking. They do an immense amount of work in the kitchen, creating meals and baking, and I think taking recipes and doubling it, or halving it, or things like that, and following that from there. My kids do use Khan Academy. That's a program that they like to use. One year, my son came to me and said he was worried that his cousin, who's in the same grade or age level as him, was further ahead in math than he was. And I explained to him that if he wants to do that kind of math and work towards, meeting where she is or whatever, I'm here, that we can take the time to do that. So he decided Khan Academy was the best fit for him, and he's been using Khan ever since. Both of my kids really like Salman, like they like how his videos and how he explains things. So for them, that's a yearly goal that they have every year, is doing their grade level or higher or more in Khan Academy. So we do use that, but the biggest thing for me is, because it comes up, so how would we use this in real life? So a lot of times it's taking it and saying, okay, the other day we had a crane here that was moving the bins, because we live on a farm. And I took the picture and showed them how the angle had to be perfect, how we're using geometry in this to make sure that when it's picked up and lowered, how they have to understand the difference, how much space that they have. So it's lowered in the right way. It's not scraping up against another bin. That really, for them, that part of geometry and calculation is very real and important for them to use. So it's doing a lot of that. Science is the same. Being outside in nature. My kids are, especially my son, is really interested in biology and animals. So a lot of his activities are centered around that, whether it's like wildlife, sighting, fishing. He likes to hunt as well too. We live in northern Alberta. That's the space that we live in. Taking courses on that, guiding, he's really interested in that. So all of that we bring into the science. And same with my daughter as well. She usually says, I want to learn more about oceans or mountains, because I feel like I don't know enough for it. So then we'll go from there. Or sound. This year, sound was something for her she wanted to explore more. So we really researched and learned more about how sound happens and why it happens, and examples. And we did experiments and different things like that with sound. So that's how we incorporate it. It's not necessarily a curriculum. Sometimes it might be if it fits my kids, and sometimes it might not be.
Just work with your child, right?
Yeah.
According to their interest. And one of the things that I foster with my students that I work with, also, it's not worksheet driven. It's more hands-on, like math, right? Which is what I do. And it's everywhere. Like, as you said, it's in your kitchen. You can teach way more inside the kitchen than on a piece of paper. It doesn't stick, right?
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
Very, very important. But there are concepts that are more, when you reach a higher level of education, that's good. Your son is learning more into that. But that's his interest. You can't push that, right?
Yeah.
He asked,
yeah.
right?
That's right.
So another question I have is, your son is 14, so he's getting closer to that, high school, finishing high school, right? Soon, one day. So how do you plan that is that also like going to college or university? Like, how do you prepare and have all those requirements for that fulfilled? How do you?
So that's a great question, because I think that's a big question for homeschoolers and unschoolers, is they want to go to college or university, how do they even get in? So my son, what we're really looking at right now is he does have a university program that he's interested in doing, wildlife biology. And it's something that he's been learning quite a bit about because he has the time on his own. He's been taking courses, for example, like the U of A has Coursera or the MOOC courses, the free online courses. So he has been taking some of those within the areas that he's interested in. For him, we haven't decided yet if he will go the traditional, if he wants to do online or a different form of learning. Here we can do parent-directed homeschooling, and there's a different way to get the high school diploma. But we also recognize that in Canada, the way that we're in the US too, it depends where you are. You need the requirements, not necessarily the diploma to enter. So and there's different avenues. I have researched different avenues in order to get that, that you can explore, and that, I do
Mhm.
recommend parents understand and know the options that they have and what they can work with.
Yeah,
Whether it's going to school maybe a little bit later, taking a
yeah,
gap
sure.
year or two and working and getting, and then applying as a mature student.
Mhm.
Or if you're transferring from out of province, there's different requirements for that. If you are, sometimes it's starting at a college, a community college. In the United States is a bit different because they can actually do community college very early and then get the credits. But here there
Yeah.
are some programs that are partner programs where you can do 2+2, and the entrance requirements might be different at the college, and then you can transfer to the university. So there are
Mhm.
different ways that we're looking at. And it's also what right now, he's been talking about. He might want to actually take a little bit of time before he enters to get some more experience in travel and work, and get that
Yes.
experience. So it's
Yeah.
never too late
And
where we live. That's the thing. There's actually still that opportunity. It's not, the door doesn't close for you when you're 21 or when you're 19. You can still continue that. So I think that's something we have to remember as well.
yeah, it's that rush, right? Right after high school, you have to decide what you want to be. You have to go into the major or minor or whatever you want to take. But sometimes it's a rush for students who are undecided. Like sometimes they don't know what they really want to,
Yeah.
right? Go into, and then it becomes a
Yeah.
waste of money, and you come out with such a big loan, and then you're sitting
Yeah.
there with this degree, not knowing what to do, right? Right.
Then
So
you have a loan to pay off. Yeah.
taking that year off and really figuring out is not that bad. And then that's one way to enter for it 100%, right? Like as a mature student, all universities and colleges take you.
Mhm.
Right. So
Yeah.
there's that for sure. Yeah. And then you have to look at all the other requirements if there are. But things are changing too, right? With the COVID and everything, there's going to be restrictions are going to be a little different.
Yeah, they are. It's interesting because I know here in Alberta, I'm not sure about British Columbia, but I know in Alberta this first semester, no university is open. They're only doing online. You actually cannot attend the physical university. Everything will be online. So, yeah, again, I think that's going to really shift things. And if that continues for longer, what we're looking at for post-secondary is, I think it was already, people were already asking when it was going to change, but now I think that change is happening sooner than some expected. So right now, who's to say at the moment? But and it's also now with the internet, it's really changed things. Like that's the difference I see with education right now between even primary or high school education, secondary, and then post-secondary, is that the educational institutes used to be the gatekeepers of all the knowledge. You had to go there to get your knowledge and learning and information. Now with the technology and the way the world is, that's changed. They're no longer the gatekeepers. So, what they do, their use is shifting. There are still great things that they offer, but there are other ways to get that learning and knowledge and even experience that is not necessarily that traditional education form, depending on what you're going to do too. So
Yeah, just alone on YouTube, you can learn so much now, right?
yeah,
There's just vast of information. You
yeah,
just,
so much, so much.
yeah, that wasn't available for us like that. But now, right, it's so much for our kids. So it's a good opportunity.
Yeah, it is.
College, right? You're a school board trustee, right? And what changes do you want to see in the current education system?
I think the changes is really, I would like the education system, the institution of education, to be more flexible, to offer more flexibility and diversity for the individual student. Right now, the schooling system is very much about fitting into a certain box, and the measurements really complement that structure to fit into a certain box. And I understand that when it comes to the government and how they want to measure, because they're providing funding and money, so they want to see how it's being used, and they also are responsible to their taxpayers. So they having a standard form of measurement helps to show those results, right? I understand that. But what happens is when we have so many kids in an institution and setting who are so uniquely different, that box doesn't fit everyone. And many times our kids end up becoming somebody else. They try and fit in that box with an arm out or a leg out, or they completely scrunch in and become small, or some might fit into the box, but maybe there's other opportunities that are taken away because of that. So I would love to see the education system really work with the individual needs of the student, or quality, strength, in that way. Look at the whole child and how we can really keep the curiosity and love of learning going. But at the same time, I think we have the opportunity to provide services and supports to our students to really help them be engaged in their learning and in their self-directed learning as well. There's some great models like Agile Learning Centers, different parts of the world, that I really like how they are flexible and they support a child's differences, and they can really work with a child that way, and not just a child but an entire family, because I think that's wonderful when the entire family is engaged in the education process. And I know sometimes we'll hear where school says, well, not everybody can do that. Not every family can homeschool. Not every child has that opportunity. But I think in a center like an Agile Learning Center or an education institute that is flexible to the individual child, then we can meet every child. Maybe a child needs a bit more other support. There's food programs right now that schools provide. We can still provide those things. Maybe there's other developmental supports that they can provide. It can be a service hub in order to really complement each child, and then therefore the family, and then extend to the community. So that's my big grand dream about education.
Awesome. And then you said it beautifully, like we tried to fit all the kids into this box, right? And their hands out or legs out. And that's when you see these behaviors, right, that you have to deal with in the school system. And then we always treat the behavior instead of, we don't look at that we're trying to fit them into this box, and we're always focused on the behavior. And that's kind of, as a teacher, you end up doing that a lot more than actually delivering the education to the child, right? So that's a problem. It's an ongoing problem, right? It needs to be solved somehow.
And I think for teachers as well, it's not easy, because in some ways the teachers have to fit into that box too. So it's not saying that the teachers are trying to put the kids into this box. The teachers themselves are being
part
stuck
of the box.
into the box.
Yeah, part of the box too.
Yeah, they're part of the box. Yeah. So there's not very much flexibility, and it's asking a child to have more say and self-direction, but yet the teacher doesn't have that for themselves. So how can you even model that for your students when you're not even afforded that opportunity? So yeah, there's huge adjustments that can be made for sure.
So I was just going to finish off by saying what you said is that even a teacher cannot, they are all part of that system, right? So we're all fighting to find the balance to help our students and help us even, right? And they won't even have the answer to a question like your son was asking, why do I need to learn this countries versus this country? And, the only answer she would, or he would have as a teacher, is because it's part of the curriculum, and that's not enough for a child's curiosity. That's not an answer. That's a shutdown, right? Basically, you just do what I said kind of answer, which is not healthy for a child, right? Yeah. What are the joys of unschooling your kids?
Really, the joys are the time and the freedom, and the time and freedom to explore what is really interesting to us, to explore our relationship and to build a stronger relationship, to work through the difficulties, and having the time and freedom to take that time to work through the difficulties, because sometimes we need more time in order to do that. And I think, it falls really underneath those two things, is the time and freedom that it gives us to have fun, and also the freedom for my kids to be themselves. I do see how in so many ways, because they aren't stuck in that box, they don't feel the pressure of having to be in that box. So they're allowed to be a lot more of them, of who they are, instead of having to fit and conform to something else, whether it's a certain social group or certain idea of learning. And they can really, have that freedom to be themselves. And I think it brings a lot of joy and contentment when you have that. So that's probably the biggest part of it.
And what's your advice for parents who are on the fence of, deciding, should I send my kid back to school for whatever reason? I don't want to. Should I keep them, unschool them, homeschool them? What should I do? Like that kind of feeling, when something inside of you is telling you want to change, especially at a time like this, right? What's your advice for them?
I think I always say actually exactly what you had brought up earlier, is my advice is to go back to your why your purpose.
Mhm.
Maybe even write that down. Why are you looking for something different? What are your family's values around learning and life? What are your values around learning and life? And getting a better understanding of that. And from there, then you can see again the what and the how that will fit that. Maybe it is something like time to build your relationship and to support your child. Maybe they need that deeper connection because they're going through something difficult where they need more presence in that. Maybe it's a learning that they need more engagement or support in an area. Does then homeschooling and unschooling, can it offer that support for you? Or is it maybe an adjustment in their schooling? Maybe it's more communication with the school. Really go back to that purpose and why. And when you have a better, clearer idea on that, then that will help you decide down the road. And then research, find out, ask questions to the school, ask questions to homeschoolers and unschoolers, get a broad idea, get many ideas, and find out about what education and learning can look like and the options available to you. I actually have like a PDF, a workbook guide on some of the questions that I still use after 8 years that have really helped our family, and I can provide that as well to
Thank you.
listeners.
Thank you. That would be awesome. And it's okay for your mind to wander back again, say, did I make a mistake? Like if you do choose in September to not to send and start homeschooling or unschooling, and you're like, maybe I chose something wrong. This is not for us. It's okay to feel that. It's going to come because it's a transition time, right?
It might only be for the year. And you go back after a year because maybe for 1 year, your child being at home, that's what they need. And the next year it's something that's okay. That's the thing. We don't have to be stuck in it forever. And our children grow and change. Their development grows, and they might have different needs that need to be met in a different way. And so you don't feel that you have to be stuck in one choice for the rest of your life.
And then you started off by saying that on this interview that you take it one day at a time, right? That's what you tell people when they ask, what are you doing unschooling? It's just take it one day. What did you say again? What was that phrase again? You said one day?
One day at a time, every 1 year at a time, and we look at what's working and what's supporting our kids the best, and we go from there.
Yeah, perfect. Well said. Thank you so much for giving your time up and being here to advise us on this, because it's a big question in a lot of parents' mind right now. What to do for September, right? It's a big one. So this will help them clear up some of those doubts for sure. Thank you so much.
I hope so.
Thank you.